I glance once more at the battlefield, at the wreckage of all that we've lost, before turning my back to it. Grief can wait. Regret can wait. I must move forward for them, for Kieran, for the future that still remains within our grasp. Hello there and welcome. This session is designed to help you ease into deep, restful sleep. We'll begin with a simple meditation to calm your body and quiet your mind. Then, as you drift closer to sleep, I'll introduce a gentle bedtime story, just enough to carry you into your dreams. Before we begin, press the like button and subscribe for more sleep story videos. I'd love to hear from you. Leave a comment saying where you're listening from and what time. Find a comfortable position, close your eyes, and take a deep breath in and out. Take a slow, deep breath in and exhale gently. One more time, inhale deeply, filling your lungs with fresh, soothing air. And as you exhale, let go of the day, releasing any tension, any thoughts that no longer serve you. With each breath, feel your body becoming lighter, more at ease, sinking into comfort. You're doing great. Next, bring your awareness to the top of your head. Imagine a warm, gentle light resting there, like the soft glow of a bedside lamp. This light begins to spread slowly, easing away any tension in your forehead, softening the space between your eyebrows, relaxing your eyelids, your cheeks, your jaw. There's nothing you need to hold on to. Just let everything soften, loosen, unwind. Feel your shoulders drop slightly as if a weight has been lifted. Your arms become heavy, sinking into deep relaxation. With every breath, this warmth moves lower, your chest rising and falling effortlessly, your stomach soft and calm, your legs and feet completely at rest. The world around you fades into quiet. There is nothing to do, nowhere to be. Just this moment, just rest. Imagine yourself wrapped in a cozy, soft blanket of stillness, safe, warm, and peaceful. Each breath carries you deeper into comfort, deeper into rest, deeper into sleep. And here's tonight's cozy bedtime story. The Arcane University. I arrived at Eldrin Academy with a heart pounding from excitement rather than nerves. The towering spires of the academy stretched toward the heavens, their sleek marble surfaces catching the sunlight like enchanted beacons. Beyond the gates, the air thrummed with magic, unseen but palpable, like the gentle hum of a song just at the edge of my hearing. This was where I was meant to be. The moment I stepped inside, my senses were overwhelmed. The scent of old parchment and burning incense curled in the air, and students bustled past, robes in shades of deep blue and emerald swirling behind them. I had dreamed of this moment for years. Of course, I had trained in magic before, but Eldrin Academy was different. It was legendary, a place where the greatest wielders of magic had been shaped. It wasn't long before I made friends. Cassian, with his silver-flecked eyes and a mischievous smirk, had a knack for illusion spells that left us all laughing. Then there was Alira, serious and studious, but fiercely loyal, and Miko, whose fiery spirit rivaled even the wildest magic. We clicked almost instantly, bound by our shared wonder at the academy and the magic it promised to teach us. In my first week, I realized I had a natural affinity for spellcraft. During an introductory incantation class, while others struggled to channel their energy, mine flowed effortlessly. Professor Sorrel, a sharp-eyed woman with a gaze that could pierce stone, watched me with interest. By the end of the lesson, she called me aside. "You have a gift," she murmured, her fingers tapping against the ancient tome in her hands. An untrained but formidable gift. I basked in the praise, but there was something in her voice, a curiosity tinged with caution. I brushed it off, too caught up in the thrill of finally wielding real magic to pay it much mind. As the days passed, my abilities continued to grow, but so did my awareness of an undercurrent of unease. The older students whispered in hushed tones when no instructors were around. Even among the faculty, I caught glimpses of tension. Furrowed brows, hurried conversations cut short when students drew near. It was subtle but unmistakable. One evening, as I practiced in the courtyard under the violet hues of the setting sun, I overheard a conversation that sent a chill through me. Two upper-year students stood partially hidden in the shadow of a grand archway, their voices low but urgent. "It's happening again," one of them whispered. "Not here," the other hissed. "If they hear us—" Their words were cut off as they noticed me. They exchanged a sharp glance before vanishing into the depths of the academy. Something was wrong at Eldrin. I confided in my friends, but they dismissed it as paranoia. "The academy has always had its secrets," Alira said. "That's what makes it so fascinating." But I couldn't shake the feeling. And as my own magic grew stronger, so did my awareness of something lurking beneath the surface of Eldrin's grand halls. Then, one night, the veil of secrecy began to crack. A professor vanished, Professor Kale, the one who had always smiled at me kindly in the halls. There was no explanation. No one spoke his name as if he had never existed. But I remembered, and I wasn't about to let it go. The moment Leora and I crossed the threshold into the restricted section, a chill ran down my spine. It wasn't just the forbidden knowledge that lurked behind these towering bookshelves. It was the whispers, soft, insidious, curling through the air like phantom tendrils of a spell gone awry. We had followed them here, the murmurs slipping through the cracks of the academy's polished facade. A hidden war council, an unspoken curriculum, secrets buried beneath years of deception. And we had found it. Leora's hand trembled as she reached for mine. I squeezed back, though my own fingers felt like ice. A dim torchlight flickered at the far end of the aisle, casting long shadows against the floor. The air smelled of parchment, ink, and something else, something metallic, like blood soaked into the very foundation of this place. I should have turned back. We both should have. But curiosity is a cruel mistress, and she pulled us deeper. We crept forward, careful to keep our footfalls light. The voices became clearer now. We must act soon. The students are restless. They are not ready. We risk exposure. A pause, then a sigh. We are already exposed. The council suspects. I glanced at Leora. Her eyes were wide, reflecting the torchlight like a pair of twin moons. There was something unspoken between us, a silent agreement. We had to know more. We pressed closer to the shelves, our breath held as if exhaling too hard would shatter the illusion of secrecy that surrounded us. The headmistress cannot protect them forever, a third voice interjected. This one was deeper, more commanding. If they discover what we've been hiding. A loud thunk cut through the conversation. A book slammed shut. The figures in the chamber tensed. Leora yanked me backward just as a shadow flickered at the edge of my vision. My heart pounded as we stumbled behind a stack of ancient tomes, pressing ourselves into the darkness. We're not alone, the first voice hissed. Silence followed, then the unmistakable creak of footsteps approaching. I clenched my jaw, trying to steady my breathing. If they caught us, there would be no excuses, no plausible deniability. We had trespassed into knowledge that was not meant for us. A book on the shelf beside me quivered, as if disturbed by an unseen force. I swallowed hard. "Aria," Leora mouthed. I nodded, slowly reaching for the smallest of my concealed daggers. If they found us, we would not go quietly. The footsteps stopped. "Whoever you are," the deep voice called, "show yourselves." Neither of us moved. The torchlight flickered violently, casting erratic shadows. Then a low chuckle. "Very well. You leave us no choice." A gust of wind howled through the aisle, and the books around us flew from the shelves, scattering into the air like startled birds. The unseen force yanked at our hiding place, exposing us to the light. Leora gasped, and I spun on my heel, dagger in hand. 3 figures stood before us. Their faces were shrouded, their robes lined with silver embroidery. Symbols I had only ever seen in the deepest recesses of the Academy's oldest tomes. They weren't just professors, they were something more. "Students," one of them mused, tilting their head. "Clever ones." Leora's fingers dug into my arm. "Explain yourselves," the leader demanded. I lifted my chin. "We heard whispers," I said, "about a war, a secret curriculum." The leader stepped forward, their face still obscured by the shadows. "And what do you intend to do with this knowledge?" I swallowed. "That depends on what you tell us." For a moment, there was only silence. Then, to my surprise, the leader laughed. "Bold," they murmured. "Foolish, but bold." They exchanged a glance with their companions. Perhaps they are ready after all. I frowned. Ready for what? The leader gestured toward the chamber behind them. "To learn the truth." I shouldn't have noticed. I should have kept my head down, focused on my own training, and ignored the whispers threading through the academy halls. But once I saw them, saw the way their spells burned too bright, the way their movements were too precise, too deadly. I couldn't look away. At first I thought it was a simple mistake. Maybe I had stumbled upon an advanced class, something reserved for students far beyond my current level. But the more I watched, the more uneasy I became. Combat magic wasn't just being practiced. It was being honed, sharpened like a blade meant for something far more dangerous than any exam or tournament. The air buzzed with raw power as fire arced across the courtyard, barely missing the target dummies, and instead leaving deep scorch marks in the stone walls. Lightning crackled between fingers with a level of control that should have taken years to master. These weren't just students training, they were preparing for battle. I had to know why. Confronting Professor Duskbane was not a decision I made lightly. He was an imposing figure, his presence alone enough to quiet an entire lecture hall. He was not unkind, but he was strict, and he carried the air of someone who had seen far more than he let on. If anyone knew what was going on, it would be him. I waited until after class, lingering by my desk as the other students filed out. When I finally approached, he barely looked up from the book he was annotating. "Professor," I began, my voice steadier than I expected, "I need to ask about the combat training some students are doing outside class." His quill stilled. Slowly he lifted his gaze, piercing and unreadable. "Do you now?" I swallowed but pressed on. "They're using spells beyond our curriculum. Dangerous spells. It's not normal training, is it?" For a moment there was only silence. Then he sighed, closing his book with deliberate care. "Arya, there are things at this academy that do not concern you. I suggest you focus on your studies." His tone was calm, but the weight behind his words pressed against my chest like a physical force. "I don't think that's true," I said before I could stop myself. "I think something is happening, and I think you know what it is." His expression darkened, and when he spoke again, it was with an edge I had never heard from him before. "Curiosity is a dangerous thing, especially when it leads you down paths you are not prepared to walk." I clenched my fists. "That's not an answer." "No, it is a warning." He held my gaze for a moment longer before turning away, dismissing me as though the conversation had never happened. But I wasn't going to let it go. I had seen too much, and now I needed to know the truth. If Professor Duskbane wouldn't give me answers, I would find them myself. The clang of steel against steel still rang in my ears as I stumbled out of the training hall, my breath ragged, my pulse hammering against my ribs like a war drum. Sweat slicked my palms, mixing with the sting of the shallow cut Cedric had landed across my forearm. It wasn't deep, but it served as a reminder. This wasn't just a practice duel. This was something else entirely. My mind reeled as I pieced together the fragments of what had just happened. The duel had been arranged last minute, supposedly for practice, but the way Cedric moved, the way he pressed his attacks with calculated precision, told me he was testing me, pushing me, and worse, I had the sickening feeling that he had been holding back. I cast a quick glance over my shoulder. Cedric was still inside, speaking in hushed tones with Master Riven. His expression was unreadable, but there was something in the way he carried himself, in the way he had hesitated at the end of our fight, that sent a chill crawling up my spine. I needed answers. I pressed a hand against my wound to stem the bleeding and made my way toward the Academy's infirmary, forcing myself to move quickly despite the unsteadiness in my steps. The corridors were dimly lit at this hour, the torches flickering shadows across the cold stone walls. My thoughts raced. If these duels weren't just for training, then what were they for? And why did Cedric, of all people, seem to know more than he was letting on? As I pushed open the heavy wooden doors of the infirmary, I was met with the sharp scent of herbs and the soft rustling of parchment. Healer Miri looked up from her desk, her keen eyes narrowing slightly as she took in my disheveled state. "Another duel gone too far?" she asked, already rising from her seat to fetch supplies. I nodded, too drained to offer much more. "Cedric," she hummed, her fingers brushing against the wound as she examined it. "You're not the first to come in tonight, and I doubt you'll be the last." My stomach twisted. "Others?" Miri dipped a cloth into a basin of water, wringing it out before dabbing at the cut. "3 before you, 2 of them barely able to walk." A chill ran through me. "Who?" She shook her head. "I'm not at liberty to say. But you should be careful, Arya." I swallowed hard. This was worse than I thought. If others had been pushed as hard as I had, or harder, then whatever was happening here wasn't just about gauging skill. It was a test, a brutal, unforgiving test. And I had no doubt now that failure meant more than just losing a duel. I waited until Miri finished tending to my wound before slipping out of the infirmary, my mind already forming a plan. Cedric knew something, and I intended to find out what. I found him later that night, leaning against the archway of the courtyard, his arms crossed over his chest. The moonlight cast shadows across his face, accentuating the sharp angles of his jawline and the storm brewing in his eyes. He had been waiting for me. "I was wondering when you'd come," he said, his voice even, but there was something guarded beneath it. I stopped a few paces away, my fingers still curled instinctively as if I held a sword. "What's really going on, Cedric?" He sighed, shaking his head. "You weren't supposed to figure it out this soon." Anger flared in my chest. Figure what out? That we're being tested like caged animals? That someone is trying to push us past our limits without telling us why? Cedric met my gaze, and for the first time since the duel, I saw something almost like regret flicker across his features. "It's bigger than you think, Arya." "Then tell me." He hesitated, then stepped closer, lowering his voice. "The Academy isn't just training us to be warriors. They're preparing us for something else. Something coming." My breath hitched. "Coming?" Cedric nodded. "I don't know all of it, but I know this. These duels, they're not practice. They're selection." A cold dread settled in my bones. Selection for what? He hesitated, and for a moment I thought he wouldn't answer. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, he said, "For war." The word landed like a hammer to my chest. War. The academy was training us, testing us, not for defense, not for tournaments, but for something far more dangerous. And the worst part? We hadn't even known. My mind raced. If Cedric was right, then every duel, every injury, every relentless push to our limits wasn't just preparation, it was a culling. Only the strongest would make it. The rest? I didn't want to think about what would happen to them. I met Cedric's gaze, my voice steady despite the turmoil raging inside me. Then we need to find out the truth, before it's too late. He nodded, a grim determination settling over his features. Agreed. As we stood beneath the moonlit sky, the weight of what lay ahead settled heavily on my shoulders. Whatever this academy was truly preparing us for, I knew one thing for certain. This was only the beginning. I held my breath as the heavy oak doors creaked open, the dim torchlight from the hallway barely illuminating the forbidden knowledge within. The restricted section of the Eldrin Academy library was colder than the rest, the air thick with dust and the faint scent of parchment aged beyond centuries. My heart pounded, echoing in my ears as I stepped forward, my fingers tingling with anticipation and fear. We weren't supposed to be here, but the truth had been buried too long. Behind me, Finn and Leora slipped inside, closing the door as quietly as possible. Finn's eyes, usually filled with mischief, were dark with apprehension. Leora clutched the strap of her satchel, her fingers flexing like she was ready to bolt at the first sign of danger. I couldn't blame her. If we were caught, we wouldn't just be expelled. We'd be erased. "We don't have much time," Finn whispered. "What are we looking for? Anything about the factions, the war, why they've been lying to us?" My voice barely carried in the cavernous space. Rows upon rows of towering shelves loomed over us, stuffed with books bound in cracked leather and arcane symbols. Some pulsed faintly, the magic in them barely restrained. A shiver crawled down my spine, but I pressed forward, running my fingers along the spines. My hand stilled on one, its title obscured by time. I tugged it free, dust spiraling into the air. "Here." I set the book on the nearest table, flipping open the brittle pages. The ink was faded, but the words were unmistakable. Eldrin Academy had never been just a place of learning. It was a training ground, its students groomed as pawns in a magical war that had raged for centuries. Leora gasped as she read over my shoulder. This says that the factions have been using us as soldiers, that our exams are actually battles, disguised as evaluations." Finn let out a low whistle. "That explains why the third years keep disappearing." I swallowed hard. The official story was that students who failed to meet Eldrin's rigorous standards were transferred. But according to this book, they were conscripted, sent to the front lines of a war none of us even knew existed. I turned the page, my pulse quickening. There were names here, names of students, instructors. Some were marked with symbols, their meanings lost to time. But one name stood out, scrawled in the margins as if someone had desperately tried to preserve it. Professor Merriwind. Leora sucked in a sharp breath. She teaches advanced elemental theory. She's one of them, I finished, my throat tight. She's been preparing students for combat under the guise of teaching. Finn ran a hand through his hair. So what do we do? Take this to the headmaster? I shook my head. If the academy is in on this, the headmaster won't help. We need to find proof, more proof, something they can't deny. As I turned another page, the candlelight flickered, casting shadows that seemed to stretch toward us. A chill whispered through the room, setting every nerve in my body on edge. Something was watching us. Leora reached for my hand, her grip icy. We need to go. Now. The words had barely left her lips before the door slammed open, a gust of energy knocking over books and scattering parchment into the air. A figure stepped inside, their silhouette framed in the flickering light. My stomach dropped. Professor Merriwind. Her gaze swept over the chaos before settling on us, unreadable and cold. Curiosity, she murmured, stepping forward. It will be your undoing. Magic crackled at her fingertips, the air humming with restrained power. My mind raced. We had to escape, but how? We were trapped, cornered by an instructor who had likely trained dozens before us to be nothing more than weapons in a war we never chose. Finn's hand twitched toward his pocket, where I knew he kept his enchanted dagger. Leora was already murmuring a quiet spell under her breath. But I had no plan, no strategy, just the burning need for answers. Why? My voice was steadier than I felt. Why lie to us? Professor Merriwind tilted her head. Because the truth would break you before the battlefield ever could. The air turned electric. We had seconds before she struck. I met Finn in Leora's eyes. We had come searching for answers. Now we were fighting for survival. And we were not leaving without the truth. I held my breath as the heavy oak doors creaked open, the dim torchlight from the hallway barely illuminating the forbidden knowledge within. The restricted section of the Eldrin Academy library was colder than the rest, the air thick with dust and the faint scent of parchment aged beyond centuries. My heart pounded, echoing in my ears as I stepped forward, my fingers tingling with anticipation and fear. We weren't supposed to be here, but the truth had been buried too long. Behind me, Finn and Leora slipped inside, closing the door as quietly as possible. Finn's eyes, usually filled with mischief, were dark with apprehension. Leora clutched the strap of her satchel, her fingers flexing like she was ready to bolt at the first sign of danger. I couldn't blame her. If we were caught, we wouldn't just be expelled. We'd be erased. We don't have much time, Finn whispered. What are we looking for? Anything about the factions, the war, why they've been lying to us. My voice barely carried in the cavernous space. Rows upon rows of towering shelves loomed over us, stuffed with books bound in cracked leather and arcane symbols. Some pulsed faintly, the magic in them barely restrained. A shiver crawled down my spine, but I pressed forward, running my fingers along the spines. My hand stilled on one, its title obscured by time. I tugged it free, dust spiraling into the air. Here. I set the book on the nearest table, flipping open the brittle pages. The ink was faded, but the words were unmistakable. Eldrin Academy had never been just a place of learning. It was a training ground, its students groomed as pawns in a magical war that had raged for centuries. Leora gasped as she read over my shoulder. This says that the factions have been using us as soldiers, that our exams are actually battles, disguised as evaluations. Finn let out a low whistle. That explains why the third years keep disappearing. I swallowed hard. The official story was that students who failed to meet Eldrin's rigorous standards were transferred. But according to this book, they were conscripted, sent to the front lines of a war none of us even knew existed. I turned the page, my pulse quickening. There were names here, names of students, instructors. Some were marked with symbols, their meanings lost to time. But one name stood out, scrawled in the margins as if someone had desperately tried to preserve it. Professor Merriwind. Leora sucked in a sharp breath. She teaches advanced elemental theory. She's one of them, I finished, my throat tight. She's been preparing students for combat under the guise of teaching. Finn ran a hand through his hair. So what do? Take this to the headmaster? I shook my head. If the academy is in on this, the headmaster won't help. We need to find proof, more proof, something they can't deny. As I turned another page, the candlelight flickered, casting shadows that seemed to stretch toward us. A chill whispered through the room, setting every nerve in my body on edge. Something was watching us. Leora reached for my hand, her grip icy. We need to go. Now! The words had barely left her lips before the door slammed open, a gust of energy knocking over books and scattering parchment into the air. A figure stepped inside, their silhouette framed in the flickering light. My stomach dropped. Professor Merriwind. Her gaze swept over the chaos before settling on us, unreadable and cold. Curiosity, she murmured, stepping forward. It will be your undoing. Magic crackled at her fingertips, the air humming with restrained power. My mind raced. We had to escape, but how? We were trapped, cornered by an instructor who had likely trained dozens before us to be nothing more than weapons in a war we never chose. Finn's hand twitched toward his pocket, where I knew he kept his enchanted dagger. Leora was already murmuring a quiet spell under her breath. But I had no plan, no strategy, just the burning need for answers. Why? My voice was steadier than I felt. Why lie to us? Professor Merriwind tilted her head. Because the truth would break you before the battlefield ever could. The air turned electric. We had seconds before she struck. I met Finn and Leora's eyes. We had come searching for answers. Now we were fighting for survival, and we were not leaving without the truth. The heavy oak doors shut behind me with a weighty finality. I stood before Headmistress Solenne's grand mahogany desk, my pulse thudding in my throat. The candlelight flickered against the stone walls, casting eerie shadows that felt like they were watching me, waiting to see if I would break. "You have a choice, Arya," Selene said smoothly, her fingers steepled beneath her chin. "Join the elite war training program, or—" She let the sentence hang, as though the alternative didn't need words. I swallowed hard. There was no misunderstanding her meaning. Students who refused were never seen again. Disappearances turned to whispers, then silence. No one dared ask questions, and those who did often vanished themselves. My mother's voice echoed in my mind. "Keep your head down, stay unseen." But how could I remain unseen when Selene had placed me in the center of the storm? "What happens to those who decline?" I asked, though I already knew. My voice came out steadier than I felt. Selene's lips curled into a small smile, cold and knowing. "It is not refusal that dooms them, Arya. It is weakness. A student unwilling to fight is a liability, a burden." Her piercing gaze locked onto mine. "And we do not suffer burdens here." I clenched my fists at my sides. Every fiber of my being told me to run, but where? The walls of the academy stretched higher than any escape I could imagine, the guards ever watchful. Running wasn't an option, so I did the only thing I could. I lifted my chin. "I accept." Solene's smile widened, a glimmer of satisfaction in her sharp eyes. "Good. Training begins at dawn." She dismissed me with a flick of her hand, and I turned on my heel, each step feeling heavier than the last as I left the office. The corridors of the academy were colder than usual, the air thick with the weight of the choice I had made. War training. The words alone sent ice down my spine. I had spent my years here carefully navigating around the brutal combat programs, blending into the academic shadows. I wasn't strong like the others. Not like Jax, whose talent with a blade was legendary, or Cassia, who could fell a grown man with a single blow. But now I would be among them, one of them. I reached my dormitory, my hands trembling as I shut the door behind me. My roommate, Lyra, sat on her bed, her dark eyes scanning a book on war strategy. She looked up at me, her gaze sharp. "You're pale." I forced a tight smile. "Headmistress Selene summoned me." Lyra's expression darkened. "And?" I hesitated before answering. "I'm joining the war training program." Silence, the kind that stretched and clawed at the air, full of unspoken words. Lyra's jaw tightened. "You didn't have a choice." "No." She exhaled sharply and shut her book. "Then you survive." That was the unspoken rule of the academy. No matter what, you survived. But I couldn't shake the feeling that by accepting Selene's offer, I had sealed my fate in a different way. Dawn came too soon. I dressed in the training uniform left at the foot of my bed. Black tunic, fitted pants, boots laced up to my knees. The fabric felt foreign, heavier than my usual attire. Lyra watched me quietly as I tied my belt. "Don't show weakness," she said. "Not even once." I nodded, though I wasn't sure I could manage it. The training grounds were already buzzing when I arrived. A dozen students stood in formation, their expressions unreadable. Some glanced at me, calculating, assessing. Others ignored me entirely. Jax was among them, arms crossed over his chest, his usual smirk absent. He gave me a single look before turning away. Cassia, beside him, merely raised an eyebrow. Instructor Veros strode in, his presence commanding silence. He was built like a fortress, every inch of him scarred from battles I could only imagine. "New recruit," he said, eyes locking onto me. "Step forward." I hesitated only a fraction of a second before obeying. Veros circled me like a predator. "You don't belong here." I bit the inside of my cheek. Headmistress Solène disagrees. A flicker of something, amusement, crossed his face. "We'll see." Without warning, he lunged. I barely had time to react before his boots swept under my feet, knocking me to the ground. Pain jolted through my body as I hit the dirt, gasping. Laughter rippled through the other students. Veros loomed over me. "This is war training. You either fight or you fall." Blood pounded in my ears. I scrambled to my feet, chest heaving, my fingers curled into fists. I wasn't strong, I wasn't fast, but I had spent years watching, learning. If I couldn't overpower, I could outthink. Veros attacked again, but this time I moved. I sidestepped, his strike missing by an inch. His eyes narrowed. "Better," he admitted. "Again." The hours blurred into exhaustion, bruises forming faster than I could count. Every moment was a test, every glance a challenge. But I didn't fall again. Not because I was strong, but because I couldn't afford to. When training finally ended, my body screamed in protest. I dragged myself back to my dorm, every muscle aching. Lyra looked up from her desk. "You're still standing," she said. "Barely." A ghost of a smile. "Good." I collapsed onto my bed, but sleep didn't come. My mind raced with the reality of what I had signed up for. The war training program wasn't just about combat, it was about survival. And I needed to do more than just endure it. I needed to outlast it, outsmart it, because if I didn't, I would disappear like the rest. My wrists ached from the tight iron cuffs binding them, but the pain was nothing compared to the icy dread curling in my stomach. The betrayal still burned, raw and fresh, more painful than any wound. I should have seen it coming. I should have been more careful. The War Council sat before me like gods passing judgment. Draped in deep crimson robes, their faces were shadowed by flickering torchlight. Chancellor Drevin, the man who once claimed to see promise in me, now regarded me with the cold detachment of a man appraising a broken tool. His steely gray eyes fixed on mine as he leaned forward, fingers steepled beneath his chin. "Aria Valkane," he intoned, voice smooth as polished steel. "You stand accused of conspiracy against the Academy and by extension the High Order. You have been seen consorting with traitors, sowing discord among your peers, and worst of all—" He paused, letting the weight of his next words crush down upon me, "endangering the stability of the very institution that has given you everything." I swallowed hard, but refused to lower my gaze. "Given me everything? You mean stripped away everything I had and rebuilt me in your image? My voice came out steadier than I expected. Dreven's lips curled into a smirk, as if amused by my defiance. And yet you played along for so long. Tell me, was it guilt that made you turn? Or merely ambition? I clenched my fists, the metal cuffs biting into my skin. I wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing my fear. I had worked too hard, sacrificed too much to let it end like this. I forced myself to breathe slowly, to focus. You expect me to justify my actions to you? I said. The Academy is not what it claims to be. You shape us into weapons, not protectors. A murmur rippled through the council chamber. Some among them, I knew, were not entirely convinced of the Academy's righteousness. I had spent months uncovering the truth, gathering others who saw what I saw. Those who knew the Academy's power did not come from noble intent, but from control and fear. And then someone betrayed us. I still didn't know who. I replayed every moment leading up to my capture, searching for the weak link. But it didn't matter now. The damage was done. Dreven's smirk deepened. He turned slightly, addressing the shadowed figure to his right. You knew her best. Perhaps you should be the one to ask her the necessary questions. My stomach twisted. I already knew who it was before they stepped into the light. Cassian. The sight of him nearly stole the breath from my lungs. His dark eyes, once filled with quiet warmth, were now unreadable. The betrayal cut deeper than I could have imagined. He had stood beside me in the shadows, whispered plans of resistance in the quiet safety of candlelit rooms. He had been the one I trusted most, and now he was the one to break me. His expression betrayed nothing as he spoke. Arya, why did you do it? I stared at him, searching for the man I once knew. I should be asking you that. Cassian's jaw tightened. You don't understand what's at stake. Oh, I understand, I said bitterly. I understand that you were afraid, that you sold us out to save yourself. Something flickered in his eyes, but it was gone too quickly for me to grasp. He turned to Dreven. She won't talk easily. Dreven chuckled, rising from his seat. Then we will help her. Two guards moved forward, gripping my arms roughly. I thrashed, but their hold was unyielding. Dreven reached into his robe, withdrawing a small vial filled with a shimmering, silvery liquid. My heart pounded. I recognized it immediately. Veritas serum, a truth serum, but not the kind that simply forced words from your lips. No. This one twisted into the mind, unraveling thoughts like tangled thread, breaking down even the strongest resistance until nothing was left but raw, painful truth. Cassian's expression didn't change, but I thought I saw a flicker of hesitation, or maybe that was just hope trying to deceive me. Dreven held the vial up, letting the torchlight dance over the liquid. We will know everything soon enough. The guards forced my head back, my struggles useless against their strength. The vial tilted, the liquid sliding closer to my lips. I had one chance. One moment before the serum took hold, I let my body go slack, feigning defeat. The moment their grip loosened, I lashed out. My foot connected with one guard's knee, and he let out a startled cry. Using the distraction, I wrenched free and lunged forward, grabbing the vial from Drevin's hand. A chorus of shouts erupted. Cassian moved, but I was faster. I spun, hurling the vial to the ground. It shattered against the stone floor, the shimmering liquid sizzling as it spread. Drevin cursed. The guards regained themselves, charging toward me. No escape. I met Cassian's gaze one last time. For a fleeting moment, regret flashed across his face, but regret wouldn't save me now. Pain exploded at the back of my skull as a guard's strike sent me crumpling to the ground. My vision blurred. Darkness crept at the edges of my mind, pulling me under. The last thing I saw was Cassian turning away. The revelation struck me like a bolt of lightning. This wasn't just a war between rival factions. It was a battle for the very essence of magic itself. Some wanted to shackle it, to regulate and control it, while others sought to let it run free, wild and unrestrained. And Eldrin Academy, my school, my supposed sanctuary, was training us for one side of this war. But which side? My hands trembled as I gripped the worn leather cover of the book before me, an ancient tome that had revealed these horrifying truths. The candle beside me flickered, casting long shadows against the library's high stone walls. It felt as if the very air around me was holding its breath, waiting for my next move. I thought back to everything I had been taught here. We learned precision, control, discipline. We were warned about the dangers of magic's untamed force. But was that out of wisdom or fear? A whisper of movement caught my attention. I turned just in time to see the head librarian, Master Corwin, step into the dim glow of the candlelight. His gaze fell to the book in my hands, his expression unreadable. "That is not a text meant for students, Arya," he said softly. "Then why leave it here?" My voice was steady, but inside my heart pounded. Why let the truth hide in the open? He sighed, running a hand through his graying beard. Because in time, every student must decide where they stand. You mean every student must choose a side in this war? Not just the war, Arya, the future. The weight of his words settled over me, heavier than any spell I had ever cast. This wasn't just about battle tactics and magical duels. It was about deciding what magic should be. Should it be harnessed, kept in check, wielded only by those deemed worthy? Or should it be allowed to shape itself, a force of nature as untamable as the sea? "And Eldrin?" I asked, voice barely above a whisper. "Which side are we on?" Master Corwin hesitated, his blue eyes darkening. "That, my dear, depends on who you ask." I swallowed hard. I needed answers, and I needed them fast. That night, sleep evaded me. The moonlight streamed through the high windows of my dormitory, illuminating the threads of doubt weaving through my mind. I replayed everything I had been taught, our lessons on focus and precision, our constant warnings against reckless casting. And then I thought of my friend Kieran, whose magic had surged wildly beyond his control once, only to be locked away in the Academy's dungeons. Was that an act of mercy or oppression? I had to know the truth. Dawn had barely begun to paint the sky when I made my way toward the restricted archives. My cloak billowed around me as I slipped through the Academy's silent halls. If there were answers, they would be there. The guards at the archive entrance were slumped against the wall, asleep. A sleeping spell, faintly shimmering in the air around them, told me someone else had beaten me here. I pressed on, my heartbeat hammering in my ears. I stepped into the vast chamber lined with towering shelves, their contents hidden beneath layers of dust and secrecy. And in the center of the room, by the grand oak table, stood Kieran. He looked up sharply, eyes widening when he saw me. "Arya, you're looking for answers too," I guessed. He hesitated before nodding. "You don't know everything they've done, Arya. The Academy doesn't just train students, it chooses them, shapes them, the ones who don't fit the mold. They get locked away," I finished, my stomach twisting. "Like you almost did." Kieran's jaw tightened. "Like I almost did, and others weren't so lucky." The words hung between us like a storm cloud. A flicker of light caught my eye. A parchment spread out before Kieran, its ink glowing faintly in the dimness. "What is that?" I asked. "A list," he murmured. "Names of students who've disappeared, ones who refused to conform, ones who dared to ask questions." I stepped closer, scanning the names. Some I recognized, others I didn't, but all had one thing in common. None had ever graduated. A cold realization settled over me. Eldrin Academy wasn't just preparing students for war. It was ensuring that only those who followed their vision of magic survived it. A door creaked in the distance. Kieran tensed, shoving the parchment into his cloak. "We have to go. Now." I didn't argue. Together, we slipped back into the shadows, the truth burning inside me. This war wasn't just about magic. It was about control, and I would not be controlled. Whatever it took, I would find the other side of this battle. I would learn what the Academy feared, and when the time came, I would decide for myself what magic was meant to be. I pressed my back against the damp stone wall, my breath shallow as I listened for any signs of pursuit. The tunnels beneath the Academy stretched out like a labyrinth, dark and musty, winding deeper into forgotten passageways. The War Council had nearly caught us, and I could still feel the ghost of their grip tightening around my wrist. We had barely escaped. One moment too late, and we would have been dragged back into their clutches, silenced before we could expose the truth. A dim lantern flickered beside me, casting elongated shadows on the rough-hewn walls. My allies were scattered in the narrow tunnel, catching their breath, their faces a mixture of exhaustion and determination. Ronan crouched by a stack of old crates, his brows furrowed as he sketched a crude map in the dust on the ground. "We can't stay here long," he muttered. "The Council will search every inch of the Academy for us. They'll assume we're in hiding, but they won't expect us to strike back. I nodded, my mind racing. That's exactly what we need to do. We can't just run. We have to make them regret ever trying to control us. Beside me, Kale exhaled sharply. Easier said than done, Arya. They've spun their webs so tight that no one even questions what's happening inside these walls. We need proof. Something undeniable. I turned to Alira, the only one among us who had access to the Council's most guarded secrets before our escape. Her dark eyes flickered in the lantern's glow. You said there's a hidden archive beneath the library. If we can get in there, we can find the documents, the records, everything they've been hiding. Alira hesitated, then gave a slow nod. It's dangerous, but it's possible. The only way in is through a passage that connects to the headmaster's wing. If we're caught... She didn't need to finish. We all knew the price of failure. Ronan wiped his dusty hands on his tunic. Then we don't fail. We need a plan. We'll split into teams. One to create a diversion, the other to get into the archive. Arya, you're the only one who can get past the security rooms. You'll lead the infiltration team. I met his gaze, my pulse thrumming. Then let's do it. The academy was quieter at night, but the silence held a weight to it, like the air itself was waiting for something to break. We moved like shadows along the hidden tunnels, our footfalls muffled by the damp earth. The scent of old parchment and dust drifted through the cracks in the stone, a reminder of how close we were to our goal. Ronan and Kale peeled away first, heading toward the alchemy wing where they would trigger the first stage of our distraction. That left Alira and me to press forward toward the library. My fingers tightened around the hilt of my dagger as we neared the hidden passage. Alira whispered a quick incantation, her voice a thread of sound against the dark. The stone wall before us trembled, then slid open just enough for us to slip through. The air inside was thick with the scent of old tomes and magic, a heavy presence lingering in the darkness. We stepped inside, our movements precise and silent. The archive loomed before us, a chamber lined with towering shelves, stretching beyond the reach of our lantern's glow. My heart pounded as I scanned the rows of locked cabinets, each one holding secrets the War Council never wanted to see the light of day. Alira moved with purpose, tracing her fingers over a series of ancient runes carved into the wooden panels. They warded these, she whispered. It'll take time to break the seals. I kept watch, my eyes flickering between the entrance and the shadows beyond. A distant rumble echoed through the walls. The diversion had begun. We had to move fast. Alira let out a sharp breath. Got it. The locks released with a faint hiss, and she swung open the cabinet, revealing rows of parchment, bound volumes, and sealed scrolls. My hands trembled as I reached for the nearest document, my eyes scanning the elegant script. Experimentation logs, reconditioning protocols, proof that the academy was more than just a place of learning. It was a prison, a place where minds were reshaped, where students were forged into weapons against their will. This is it. I whispered. "This is what we need." Alira quickly bundled the documents into a satchel. We turned toward the exit, but before we could move, the air in the room shifted. A whisper of movement. Too late. I spun, my dagger already in hand. A figure emerged from the darkness, their eyes gleaming like polished steel. Going somewhere? I had always known this day would come, but knowing did not soften the terror that gripped me as the sky darkened with smoke and fire. The war factions had finally made their move, breaking the fragile illusion of peace that the Academy had clung to for so long. Alarms shrieked through the air, mingling with the cries of the wounded and the deafening roars of spellfire. I stood at the highest tower, looking down at the battlefield that had once been the hallowed grounds of my education. The Academy's banners, once symbols of knowledge and enlightenment, were now tattered and burned. Mages fought desperately, their incantations lighting up the dusk like falling stars. The scent of scorched earth and blood thickened the air, pressing against my senses with suffocating weight. "Arya!" a familiar voice snapped me from my trance. Professor Calum, his robes torn and smeared with soot, grabbed my shoulder. "You need to fight. We cannot let them take the Academy." Fight. I had spent my years here studying magic, practicing control, refining my ability to wield power. But nothing had prepared me for this, for the screams, for the bodies lying motionless where students had fallen, for the realization that magic was not just knowledge, it was devastation. A monstrous force exploded at the outer gates, sending shockwaves through the ground. I stumbled but caught myself in time to see the faction warriors storming in. Their armor gleamed with runes, their weapons pulsed with stolen magic. They were ruthless, cutting down anyone in their path. The Academy had taught us that we were protectors, guardians of knowledge, but knowledge did not protect the students who now lay dead. And the Academy, for all its teachings, had been built on a foundation of lies. Lies that had kept us complacent. Lies that had led us to believe we were safe. "Arya!" Calum called again, shoving a staff into my hands. "Do not falter. The Academy needs you." The Academy needs me. But what had the Academy ever done for me? For us? It had trained us, yes, given us power, but it had also shackled us with its rules, its politics. It had hoarded magic, claiming to be its rightful keeper while the world outside suffered for lack of it. A faction warrior broke through the courtyard defenses, his blade dripping with blood. He locked eyes with me, and in that moment I had to choose. Did I fight for the Academy? Did I fight for the institution that had raised me, even if it was flawed? Or did I defy it, seize my own path, and decide for myself what magic should be used for? My grip tightened on the staff, my heart hammering against my ribs. The battle roared around me, and for the first time I understood what true power was. It was not in the Academy, it was in choice. And I had made mine. The battlefield shimmered with broken spells, the air thick with the metallic scent of blood and burnt magic. I stood across from Cedric, his blade still crackling with residual energy, his breathing heavy. His eyes, always so unreadable, now flickered with something raw. Pain, regret, determination. Arya, he called my name, voice strained yet resolute. You think I do this blindly? That I serve the academy without reason? I gritted my teeth, the weight of my exhaustion pressing down on my limbs. You don't have to do this at all, Cedric. His lips curled into something akin to a bitter smile. If only it were that simple. He lifted his free hand, and in the palm of it, a wisp of silver magic coiled, memories unfolding like an unwelcome dream. The vision struck me before I could prepare. A younger Cedric, no more than a boy, kneeling over a fallen figure. A woman with raven dark hair, her breath shallow, her lips trembling as she whispered something I couldn't hear. Then a shadow loomed over him, cold and unyielding, the mark of the academy branded upon its chest. I staggered as the vision snapped back to the present. They took everything from you. Cedric nodded. And then they gave me purpose. His grip on the blade tightened. I was broken, Arya, and they put me back together. If you tear this down, what happens to the ones like me? I clenched my fists. I had spent years fighting against the Academy's tyranny, uncovering their corruption, trying to carve a new future for those who suffered beneath their rule. But Cedric wasn't wrong. There were others, countless others, who had known nothing but the Academy's shelter, however cruel. A tremor split the ground between us. In the distance, the battle raged on, our allies and enemies locked in a war that I had started. I could see them. Dain, his fire barely holding back the onslaught of soldiers. Mira, her healing spells flickering as she knelt beside the wounded. They were all waiting for my choice. Cedric stepped forward, his blade lowering slightly. There's still time, Arya. We can stop this before more lives are lost. My heart pounded. Every choice I had made had led to this moment, this single breath where the world teetered on the edge of ruin or rebirth. I took a step forward, the weight of my destiny settling in my chest. No more half measures. Cedric's eyes widened as I reached for his hand, my magic unraveling in golden threads. What are you? I pressed my palm against his, and a surge of warmth erupted between us. Not an attack, not a restraint, a connection, a merging of understanding. His memories surged into mine and mine into his. A lifetime of losses, of battles, of choices that had shaped us into the warriors we had become. Tears welled in Cedric's eyes. For the first time his mask cracked completely. Arya, there's another way, I whispered. Help me find it. The battlefield stilled, as if holding its breath for what would come next. And in that moment, Cedric let his blade fall to the ground, and the tides of war shifted forever. The dust settles, swirling in slow spirals around me, catching in the dim light of the smoldering wreckage. My breaths come shallow, each inhale tinged with the scent of ash and burnt earth. The battle is over, but the war is far from won. I stagger forward, each step a test of will. The ground beneath me is littered with bodies, the fallen strewn across the battlefield like forgotten relics of a war that history will soon twist into legend. Some I knew by name, others only by their final cries. All of them ghosts now, haunting the edges of my vision. My hand presses against the deep wound in my side. The fabric of my tunic is soaked, warm and slick, but I force myself to stand tall. I cannot afford weakness. Not now. Not when so many have sacrificed everything for this single moment. Kieran is gone. The thought strikes me like a blade to the heart, sudden and cruel. I squeeze my eyes shut, willing away the image of his lifeless form crumpled beneath the shattered ruins of the citadel. He had stood beside me, fought for this cause as fiercely as I had, and yet the fates had claimed him first. But I cannot mourn him yet, not when there is still so much left to do. I turn my gaze to the horizon where the sky bleeds into a crimson dusk. The world is watching. The council, the rebels, the hidden enclaves of magic that have long been waiting for a sign. They will look to me now, expect me to guide them, to lead them into the next battle. Because though we won this fight, the war for magic's future is only beginning. A shuffling sound draws my attention, and I pivot, drawing what little magic remains in my bones to my palm. A faint glow gathers, flickering like a dying ember, but the figure that emerges from the ruins is not an enemy. Lyria's face is streaked with soot, her robes tattered, her left arm hanging limp at her side. But she is alive. Barely. Arya, her voice is hoarse, brittle. It's not over. I know. She sways on her feet and I reach out, steadying her. Her body trembles beneath my touch. The council. They still hold the archive, if they unlock its secrets. They won't, I vow, though the certainty in my voice is a fragile thing. She meets my gaze, searching for something, hope, reassurance, maybe just an anchor to keep her from falling apart. I offer her my hand, and she takes it. The wind shifts, carrying the scent of rain and the distant sound of battle drums. They are regrouping, preparing for the next move. And so must I. I glance once more at the battlefield, at the wreckage of all that we've lost, before turning my back to it. Grief can wait. Regret can wait. I must move forward for them, for Kieran, for the future that still remains within our grasp. My steps are slow but certain as I lead Lyria away from the ruins. The path ahead is treacherous, and I have no illusions of what it will demand of me. Blood, sacrifice, more loss than I am ready to bear. But I will not falter. The war is far from over, and I will see it through to the end.